Good evening, everyone. I'm Melvin Scales, and I'm honored to have served as your chair for BPI's advisory committee this year. And I'm joined this evening by someone who needs no introduction.
My name is Andrea Hulligan, and I am the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Winston-Salem Foundation and work closely with BPI. For those who have attended one of our fundraisers before, you have felt what it is like to be a part of our annual event. There's always music as soon as you walk in the door, and so many warm and welcoming faces. The room is always bustling with conversation, and there has been some dancing known to happen on occasion. We miss that immediate sense of community and we miss you, but we are so thrilled to have you joining us in this virtual way. We know several of you are hosting Facebook Live watch parties, and we hope many of you will post about this evening's event on social media using hashtag GiveBlackWS and hashtag BPI to make it as engaging as possible. We are so excited about what we have planned for you this evening. This has been such a challenging year and has been downright traumatizing and exhausting for many of us of color. But this evening, we wanted to spend some time celebrating and reflecting on some successes while also acknowledging that the work is far from over. You'll first hear more about BPI and then see an engaging panel focused on educators and students of color. We'll wrap up with some special donor and sponsor recognitions and with a call to action to support BPI. But don't worry, you don't have to wait until the end. Below on the screen, you will see the web address that will take you directly to where you can make your gift at any time during the event. We hope you come away tonight feeling energized to become advocates for BPI, as well as our educators and students of color. We start this evening by honoring our roots.
Thank you, Andrea. I know you will agree that 2020 is one for the record books. We have all been struggling with a tremendous racially charged level of social unrest that is unprecedented and being compounded by an unrelenting pandemic. And yet, we continue to move forward with a passion that allows us to overcome these obstacles through our collective gifts of time, talent, and treasure. BPI will not be able to accomplish our mission without the generous support of our volunteer and donor base. It is through the power of collective giving, where we pool all of our resources together to make a difference, that we're able to have a greater impact on issues affecting the local Black community. This evening, I hope you will be inspired to invest your time, talent, and treasure so that collectively our shared efforts may continue to build on the legacy of giving inherent in the Black community. In November of last year, we lost a Black Philanthropic Initiative icon. This person is the real reason why Andrea and I are even able to be with you tonight. Mr. Marshall Bass, the first chair of BPI, passed away. His vision for Winston-Salem's Black community continues now, and I know it will continue as long as we have dedicated community leaders like you pushing us onward and upward together. Established in 2000, BPI honors the long-standing sharing traditions within the Black community and serves as a model for rethinking philanthropy in Forsyth County. BPI's vision is to expand the concept of philanthropy to include investments of time, talent, and treasure, and acknowledges that the powerful history of giving in the Black community is a great example of what philanthropy should be. And now, 13 years later, BPI continues to embody that vision. Based upon the Rethinking Philanthropy report that we released to the Winston-Salem Forsyth County community in September of 2018, which drew attention to the Black history in Forsyth County and its direct influence on the systemic issues and inequities still prevalent in our community today, we have focused on advancing racial equity in education by providing funds to organizations that are committed to leveling the playing field in the education of our young Black people. With the onset of the Covid-19 pandemic, it became clear that we addressed the equity issues around remote student learning, recognizing that technology and internet access have become a heightened equity issue with the closing of schools. we postponed our planned grants for April until later this fall and made contributions totaling $20,000 to our city-county school system, the Quality Education Academy, and the Carter G. Woodson School. Moreover, we were able to make impact grants to local organizations such as the Winston-Salem African American Archive, the Well Center for Formerly Incarcerated Women, and the Bridge Program, which will provide financial literacy workshops for students. A few days ago, I found a quote that I believe truly captures what this 2020 year has hopefully taught all of us. The quote reads as follows: "If your path is difficult, it is because your purpose is bigger than you thought." Well, I'm convinced that our purpose is bigger than any of us could have ever imagined. Thank you for continuing your support of BPI and the vision. Andrea?
Thanks, Melvin. I want to take a few minutes to expand on your thoughts about this year because BPI did a lot of intentional planning and thinking through how to continue to build on its incredible roots and all of the impactful work you just spoke to. As a part of this planning, BPI looked in particular at how it could better ensure it was reaching Black-led organizations through its community engagement and grant-making work. From that, the impact grants that Melvin alluded to earlier was created. BPI developed the Impact Grants program to focus explicitly on smaller Black-led organizations doing impactful work in the local Black community in a variety of issue areas. In creating the program, we also thought about how to make the application process more inviting and accessible, and decided to forego the typical written application and ask organizations to submit videos instead. The program has been a huge success. Many of the Black-led groups that applied had never interacted with BPI in the past. BPI provided nearly $30,000 in impact grants during this inaugural year. As Melvin mentioned, equity in education also continued to be a major focus of BPI this year. In addition to the grants to the schools for remote learning, in February, BPI partnered with Salem College to host a discussion with Black youth who shared their experiences attending predominantly white schools and discussed how parents and the broader community could better support students of color. BPI then partnered with Action for Equity and Love Out Loud this summer on a virtual series dedicated to supporting parents and educators as they prepared for a very unpredictable school year. We know that the pandemic has only heightened racial inequities, and BPI has committed to making additional grants focused on equity in education later this fall. In all, BPI will provide a record level of approximately $100,000 in grants this year, with many thanks to the support of our individual, corporate, and foundation supporters. What a year, Melvin.
Well, before we move on to the next portion of our program, we have one more piece of news to share. BPI's advisory committee was presented with the opportunity to work with M Creative on a new logo earlier this year. You saw a sneak preview with the fundraiser invitation, and this evening we're excited to make the new logo official. We believe that this new logo both honors our legacy and the work over the last 20 years while also ushering us into the next decade of work. We hope you'll enjoy it as much as we do. We could talk all evening about BPI, but who better to speak to some of our impact than our grantees? Next up, you will hear from BPI's first Vice Chair, Corliss Sellers, who will introduce a few of our grantees. Corliss?
Thank you, Melvin and Andrea. I'm Corliss Sellers, first Vice Chair of BPI. As you know, 2020 has been a challenging year for all of us. The pandemic has been hard on essential workers, the unemployed, and small businesses, and our schools. Especially hit hard are the students and under-resourced families in our community. As the schools shifted to remote learning, we saw how many families in our community did not have the technology nor the internet access for their children to successfully continue their education. We know from data in our Rethinking Philanthropy report that many families living in poverty in our community are disproportionately Black and brown due to historical and systemic factors. We also know how expensive technology and internet can be. Deeply concerned about the impact of COVID-19 on education in our community, particularly on students of color, BPI launched into action to determine how we could help. We reached out to the Winston-Salem Forsyth County school system and 2 charter schools who serve students of color to learn how we could offer support. Overwhelmingly, they asked for financial resources to enable them to secure laptops and hotspots for their students. BPI responded immediately to this need by identifying $20,000 in funds and by awarding this funding directly to the Winston-Salem Forsyth County School System in the amount of $10,000, to Carter G. Woodson in the amount of $5,000, and to the Quality Education Academy in the amount of $5,000. BPI's rapid response to this crisis yielded positive results. We will now hear from each of the grantees and learn about the impact of this investment.
Hello, I'm Dr. Karen Roseborough, Area Superintendent with the Winston-Salem Forsyth County School District. We are just very excited that BPI was able to support our remote learning efforts here in the district with a gift of $10,000 to help us with maximizing student engagement in our underserved communities here in Winston-Salem. It was because of their generosity that we were able to increase the number of students who were engaged on a daily basis in our remote learning plan.
Hello, my name is Tanya Bellinger, Chief Executive Officer for Quality Education Academy. On behalf of myself, our board of directors, staff, scholars, families, and friends, we would like to thank you for this opportunity to publicly express our gratitude. Quality Education Academy is a K-12 public charter school serving families in Winston-Salem and surrounding communities. Our core value is to raise the quality of life of everyone we touch. As our country navigates through an unprecedented pandemic, it is organizations like the Black Philanthropy Initiative who aid others in need. With every effort to meet the needs of our families and fostering the remote learning experience, the $5,000 grant received from BPI has been instrumental. The grant funds allowed us the opportunity to purchase Verizon hotspots for families within our school who cannot afford internet access in their homes. Our commitment to ensure the success of our scholars remains a #1 priority. We believe remote learning in some capacity will become a permanent part of our educational paths. So without hesitation, we're doing all we can to assist in providing the necessary resources for our scholars and their families. This would not have been possible without you. Again, we are grateful for Black Philanthropy Initiative and their work in our community. Your gift and thoughtfulness are greatly appreciated. Thank you, and we look forward to partnering with you in the future.
Thank you. We're so appreciative here. My name is Ben Harris, School Director of Carter G. Woodson School, located in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And we are so thrilled and ecstatic for the support that we have received from the Black Philanthropy Initiative. Their $5,000 grant enabled us to provide internet access to most needy families during the pandemic and crisis. This financial support from one of the great community initiatives really can make a difference in the lives of our students and furthermore, in the lives of children in our community. We are so thankful and appreciative for this initiative, for the $5,000 grant, and we're looking forward to greater partnerships and collaborations in the future.
Good evening. My name is Mike Silver, and I serve as a member of BPI's advisory board. As you have just seen and heard, Black Philanthropy Initiative is heavily invested in supporting people, systems, and policies that are working to dismantle the inequities we see within education. We felt it was important to spend time tonight focusing on issues our educators and students of color are facing and how we as a community can support them. We have a stellar panel that will bring you a variety of different perspectives. But first, we will begin with hearing from Constance Lindsay, Assistant Professor of Educational Leadership at UNC Chapel Hill. Professor Lindsay will present some of her research on diversity among the educator workforce. And then we will dive into an in-depth panel discussion about her research and other equity issues in education.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks to BPI for this invitation. I'm super excited to share some of my work and some of the data on what's happening in North Carolina, and I hope it will inform a really interesting discussion. So I'm Constance Lindsay. I'm an assistant professor of educational leadership at UNC Chapel Hill. And most of my work focuses on thinking about ways in which we can close racial achievement gaps or opportunity gaps, or however you want to think about them, and broadly thinking about race and equity in education. A significant strand of my work, though, focuses on teachers and the role that diverse teachers play for diverse students, and in particular, the ways in which Black students can have a positive impact on their students' lives. We now have a cottage industry of studies that show that if you have a Black teacher for a Black student, and in particular for our most disadvantaged Black students, that you are less likely to experience a wide variety of negative outcomes and more likely to experience positive outcomes. The sort of one of the founding studies in this area was conducted by a gentleman named Tom D at Stanford, who showed the impacts of Black teachers on academic achievement. I have a 2017 study that looks at the impact of Black teachers in North Carolina on exclusionary discipline outcomes for Black students. And we find that when Black students have a Black teacher, they are less likely to be suspended, expelled, and receive those harsh discipline punishments that then exclude them from learning. More recently, and this is still in the works to get published, I and a set of colleagues have a paper that looks at the long run impact of having a same race teacher. So if you're matched to a Black teacher for Black students earlier in life, are you less likely to drop out of high school, more likely to attend college? And the answer is yes. And those results are driven by outcomes for persistently low income young Black boys and those kids who don't have a college educated parent at home. And this has been covered in a few places. It's been in the New York Times, it's been on a few podcasts. And so then the question is, what should we do about it? And so I'm really interested to hear what the panelists have to say, but I'll provide you with some descriptive data to sort of describe what's happening first. So this is a national issue. Nationwide, about 80% of teachers are white, and the public school student body is now majority students of color. So there's huge representation gaps. But there's a lot of nuance. So for example, in DC, students are more likely to, even though there's still these representation gaps sort of everywhere you go, students are more likely to encounter a educator of color along their trajectory. In a place like Las Vegas, you see wider gaps, but there's also there's Latinx teachers, there's Black teachers, there's a very diverse student population, and so you see these huge differentials between the diversity of the teacher population and the student population. In North Carolina, it's the same. And I'll say in both the studies that we've done using North Carolina data, over 50% of the Black students never have a Black teacher the entire time they're in K-12. About 80% of the teacher workforce is white. And there are huge differentials between white students and white teachers, Black students and Black teachers, and we have a growing Latinx student population with pretty much no teachers to teach them. And there are gaps basically in every district across the state in North Carolina. There's no district where the representation is on parity. So our work shows that a huge barrier to diversifying the teacher workforce are low numbers of diverse college grads. At its heart, this is a K-12 access issue. You need to have a BA to be a teacher. And so to the extent that we don't have the number of Black BA holders that we'd want, we don't have the number of teachers. But then there's other more nuanced things. Black students are also not majoring in education. And when they do end up in the classroom, they come through non-traditional routes. Teacher prep programs are not diverse. I did not put my employer up here, but this is actually a data visualization that I worked on when I was still at the Urban Institute, where you can actually go look up all of our NC system schools of education. And what you'll find is that most of the schools that are producing, so up here in this upper quadrant, are places where Black students are represented and there's large numbers of Black students. Those are all of our HBCUs. Besides our HBCUs, the other teacher prep programs are not producing diverse candidates. The NC Teaching Fellows program did not fund a site at a HBCU last time, and so hopefully next go round they'll rectify that. Just a few more things. About 50% of Black students who do get education degrees are not teaching, so that's a lost opportunity. They are also more likely to be unemployed, even though unemployment rates are low for teachers. So just to end with a few policy considerations before we open it up to the panel, teacher preparation programs need to produce more diverse candidates. There's huge variation geographically. And in particular, I know we're focused mainly on Black students, but we need to start thinking about Latinx students as well, because they experience worse gaps than Black students in some ways. And finally, I'll just say that diverse teacher retention in the field is really important. And this will be really important to track when budget cuts from COVID-19 occur. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about that in the panel. So I'll end there, and I guess we can open it up.
Thank you, Professor Lindsay.
Thank you.
That was really good research, and I don't know, it felt really personal to me as well for a lot of different reasons. But this is a perfect way to start our panel discussion this evening. Joining Professor Lindsay, we have Rashonda McCrimmon, who is an assistant principal at Parkland High School and a fellow Black Philanthropy Initiative Advisory Board member. And we have Christopher Mack, who is a parent of a fourth grader in the Winston-Salem Forsyth County School System. Mr. Mack's daughter originally attended Caleb's Creek Elementary. However, due to COVID-19, she is currently enrolled with the virtual academy. So I'd like to start with Ms. McCrimmon and Mr. Mack. And Ms. McCrimmon, if we start with you first, and just talk about reactions to Professor Lindsay's presentation. What resonated most with you?
I guess what resonated most with me is it's not, it didn't surprise me at all. Unfortunately, I am an administrator. I'm going into my 6th year as an administrator with this particular district. But I just remember going back through when she was talking about programs to prepare you, educational programs to prepare you. I just remember when I went back for my master's at UNC Charlotte, I was a part of a cohort, and it was 15 of us in that cohort, and I was the only African-American student in that entire cohort. Out of all the professors that I had during my 2.5-year period there, I had one African-American professor. So it doesn't just happen in secondary education or elementary education, it's at the higher levels as well. And that really just puts it in perspective for me to think, what is the state of education, not just for our Black students, but for our Black educators as well.
Mr. Mack, what resonated with you about the presentation?
Yes. In agreement with Ms. McCrimmon, I find that I wasn't necessarily surprised. However, what resonated with me is that there's an opportunity that we have. What I see in the numbers that she presented, Ms. Lindsay presented, is there's an opportunity for us to consider what can we do to reach out more so that the community that we serve has a mirror effect in the classroom and administration.
Thank you. And if I could go back to Professor Lindsay for a second, what impact do you think diversity and representation among our educators has on student performance?
Yeah, so like I said, it impacts both sort of achievement directly, and then what I like to think about as achievement related outcomes, right? Or other things that we might care about that really significantly impact the day-to-day experiences of students. So for example, the discipline paper or the research that we have around discipline is super important because, students can get derailed by discipline, right? if you experience these harsh discipline outcomes, especially early on, and we know in particular for young Black men, you're on the school to prison pipeline, right? And so we're merely saying that by diversifying the teacher workforce, you won't close those gaps, but you can get them smaller. I think another thing that's been shown in other studies, and these are some of my co-authors, they have some additional papers, is expectations, having higher expectations for students. And so I think focusing on sort of short-term things like test scores is important, but all of these other things are really what I think determine, whether someone sort of looks at their educational experiences as positive or not. And they have relations to longer term things. So I would say social, emotional, academic, discipline, all areas that we probably are concerned about.
And Ms. McCrimmon, let me ask you the same question. Going from the research academia side to the practical side as an administrator within our school system, have you seen any impacts on student performance based on teacher race and student and that student correlation?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, I just remember my time in the classroom, and I made a concerted effort to develop positive rapport and relationships with my students. I think that is so key, um, because our African American students learn differently, especially our African American boys. They learn differently. They need to have a sense, the teacher needs to have a sense of understanding of not just the child in the classroom, but the whole child, because children are coming to school nowadays and even before with so many other outside influences, so many other outside issues that you have to take that into consideration as far as how you disseminate that curriculum to your students. It's not a one-stop shop. And so, I've gone through several diversity trainings with staff, and it always comes back to this for me. When I was at UNC Charlotte, I had a professor, Dr. Mickey Dunaway, who kind of coined a phrase of poor baby syndrome, where we feel sorry for our African American kids because of their broken homes or because of the low socioeconomic background they come from. And so you have a tendency with some teachers to set the bar low because of that. I wanted to dispel that. I feel like you have to set the bar higher for our kids, and it's your job as the educator to give them the skills they need to reach that expectation. If we continue to lower the bar for our students based on circumstances, then what is the state of education, and are we being equitable in the education that we're giving our students? So it's definitely an issue. It's definitely something that districts, not just Winston-Salem Forsyth County schools, but all districts need to take a very hard look at, because like Professor Lindsay said, you're looking at kids who are disproportionately punished punitively in the classroom for simple things as not having a pencil or not having a sheet of paper or coming in having a bad day. But do we take the time to figure out, well, what were the things that maybe caused that kid not to have a pencil? It could have been, I was sleeping in my car last night and I don't know where my supplies are, or my family can't afford supplies. I may not have had breakfast this morning, so I'm a little bit irritated. We don't take those things into consideration. Some educators just think all kids have a nice bed to sleep in and supplies to bring to school, but that's not entirely the case. So we have to kind of take a step back as educators and figure out within us, what do we need to do to change or to get our students where they need to be?
Thank you. Mr. Mack, let me ask you, we both have daughters in the school system, and the question I have for you is, thinking about having Black teachers paired with Black students, when we see the data that Professor Lindsay has, and the on the ground conversation that Ms. McCrimmon had, what role does that play as you put your daughter into the school system now that she's a fourth grader? How are you looking at the teachers and the diversity of your teachers as you're focusing on your daughter's education?
Good question, Mr. Silver. Absolutely matters. And piggybacking off some of the things that Ms. McCrimmon mentioned and Professor Lindsay mentioned. So I'm always looking at metrics and data with respect to education. I actually majored in education at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, also in my undergrad. And saying that was because I felt like I had a blessed experience. I had an African-American principal at every school that I went to from 1976, so to speak, up to graduating in the 1990 from high school. So believe it or not, I never had a principal that was not an African-American. I had both a woman principal, two actually, as well as African-American male principals, which was at least two of those, give or take one change. So in saying that, I think it mattered to me when I was growing up that I saw African-American representation and leadership in the classroom. So for my child, to answer your question more specifically, it matters to me that she sees us in the classroom because again, I'm a proponent of society's leadership mirroring the society that's served. So it does matter to me that if she doesn't see enough representation, and enough for me may be that there's one or two, but there's somebody in leadership, not just somebody that's on staff as housekeeping, not just somebody respectfully that's on staff as a bus driver, but more so someone in a role such as administration, as Ms. McCrimmon is, or such as leadership as assistant principal and even a teacher in the classroom absolutely matters to me. If I don't see that as a parent, it's not likely that if I have a choice, my child will attend that school because I do think it matters that she sees representation and that it mirrors, again, the society that she's growing up in. Because in order to feel a part at the highest level, you need to see that it's possible that you can achieve these things. And I found for me, in closing, being a part of such African-American representation growing up, it encouraged me to want to go into education. So there absolutely, Professor Lindsay and Mr. Silva, I found a correlation there.
Professor Lindsay, I want to ask you this question. I was listening to Mr. Mack, and he was an education major at UNC Charlotte. I myself was an education major at North Carolina A&T, and passed my practice too and taught fifth grade. But looking at your stats, I was out of the public school system by the time I was 27. And so, based on your research that you found, what factors contribute to the limited number of educators of color that are in our schools?
So I think there's a sort of, I like to think about it as a pipeline, right? So we can think about sort of the college access issue, right? Just getting them into college. And then there's a number of things, as you guys know, since you're all educators or former educators, there's a number of things sort of along the way where Black folks sort of drop out of that pipeline, right? And so depending on where we want to intervene, we can think about it in a bunch of different ways. So like I said, college access for sure, right? Closing these achievement gaps so that kids can get to college. Also, when they get to college, we find that if they're at PWIs, they're less likely to major in education. Our schools of education are not super representative of the larger student bodies in which they're housed. And a lot of that is what Ms. McCrimmon brought up, which is just that if you don't see yourself, my sense is that when Black students do want to be in education, it's from a social justice orientation, and they don't see that reflected in the curricula of the schools where they're attending, unless it's a place explicitly designed to address those issues, which has to do with the diversity of the faculty and also some other sort of underbelly things of higher education. But then even moving forward from that, there's things, licensure challenges, right? So you mentioned the praxis. We have differential pass rates on the praxis, which is, reflective of being underserved in your K-12, right? So all of that stuff rolls into it. And then once we're in the classroom, once Black educators are in the classroom, they're less likely to stay. There's more turnover, which I think mainly has to do with working conditions. You choose to work at certain schools because you might have a particular mission, and those schools are just also harder to work at, right? And so there's lots of things along that pipeline that serve as barriers. And then I also just like to say that the teaching profession itself has a number of challenges, right? And so I like to think about this diversity piece as like one spoke, like, one thing under the umbrella of stuff. We have to pay people more, right? So I have a study that's in the works that's basically showing that for Black students to access college education, they sometimes do have to take out loans. But once that tips over a certain point, they're less likely to go in education, right? Which is rational. It makes sense. You have to be able to pay back your loans and, sustain yourself. Then you need to have pay. We're also asking, we have sort of a societal problem, and then now we're asking people to enter into a profession where they'll have less pay, and their pay will grow slower than their peers who have similar educational backgrounds. So depending on where you want to intervene along that pipeline, there's plenty of places where Black educators sort of fall off.
Ms. McCrimmon, let me ask you this question. What are the barriers that you see as an assistant principal to recruiting and retaining educators of color?
Definitely the pay. The compensation is huge because in the state of North Carolina, you really don't even get paid for your master's degree anymore. So there's no incentive to go and get higher education unless that's just something you feel passionate about and want to do or want to become an administrator. So definitely the compensation piece is very key. A lot of times African-American applicants, when they are applying, they are sometimes, and not saying this is happening here in this district per se, but sometimes they are placed in what Ms. Lindsay said were like your Title I schools. Title I schools get federally funded for low socioeconomic populations. So, and it's much more, it's definitely tougher to teach in those schools. And so if you're coming from a program that's not preparing you for that, the likelihood for you to stay is really slim. Not having enough mentorship and support for our African-American teachers. In this district, we do assign mentors to beginning teachers. But I don't know if the assignment of the mentor, if the person assigning them is being conscious of the support that an African-American teacher would need. That support is a little bit different, I feel, than it would be for the white counterparts. So it's a lot of that involved. Again, the compensation is really probably the key. When you hold job fairs, a lot of your applicants that are African Americans and are males, they're looking for one particular type of job, and that's typically in your PE and your health. So they're not being diverse in, I think, at the college level of exposing kids or exposing college students to the other content areas that are available to them. They always seem to push with the African American men to go in for PE. Well, I would love to hire an African-American man in a math class or a social studies class or even an English class so that they can see that diversity and not just think that African-American men can only coach or sport or teach PE and health. So there's a lot that needs to take place at the state level, at the college level, and definitely at the district level when it comes to recruiting and retaining educators of color.
Mr. Mack, let me ask you, because you were an education major like I was. One, were you K-6 or were you in the upper levels for your education? And did you feel like you had an experience similar to what Ms. McCrimmon is talking about, where you were steered towards physical education or the health sciences?
So thank you. So what I was going to say is, in answering the second part of that question, with respect to as an educator, was I encouraged to stay in the classroom and teach academia such as English and math, et cetera, versus become a coach? What I will tell you is in my student teaching experience, I was frustrated. I felt like from my teaching experience as a student teacher that there was a Caucasian administrator I had that on more than one occasion to me, and this is exactly what she said, and I'm paraphrasing. She said, she says, it's nice to see you trying to be a teacher. She said, but you could make more money as an African-American male with education in the corporate sector. She said, why don't you consider leaving teaching to the ladies? And why don't you consider going to corporate America with your education to make more money? And I said to her that I'm aware of that fiscal opportunity. However, I have a desire to impart into children of all types as much as she and others did. And I think it was a good question you asked, Mr. Silver, because that issue comes up quite often. And I think, as Ms. McCrimmon alluded to, a lot of times I can speak for some other individual African-American males I speak to. It seems easier. And it seems like the path is cleared more so for them to get an opportunity to work as a recreation or coach at a school. A lot of times, African-American males I talk to say that when they apply for the other types of jobs in academia, they're not given opportunity to get past the first or second interview. But if they go to a school, and maybe Professor Lindsay can allude to this, and say, hey, can I be your coach? They're like, oh, great, come on board. So great question. I think it's something to be looked at. It takes a lot of focus from an African-American male, as you know, Mr. Silver, respectfully, to pick what you're going to do to try and provide for yourself and your family. But education is always there for us. But absolutely, I was steered to go other directions. And I think that's part of why we see the numbers that we see.
Thank you for that. For Professor Lindsay, how have you seen COVID-19 impact our educators of color?
Yeah, this is actually something I've been thinking about. And, I think in many ways, because the world is in such flux, the jury's still kind of out. But the thing that I've been thinking about the most is budget cuts. And inevitably, there are going to be budget cuts, and there's going to be layoffs. And given what we know about history, I would be very afraid that Black educators would be hit the hardest, right? So the Black educators we do have, because of many of the things that we've talked about, I feel like we'll be more likely to be laid off, or shifted, or moved in ways that I think will be harmful for students. And so I know that people are having discussions around thinking about the ways in which layoffs happen. And so I've been encouraging people to also consider the sort of the impacts racially. If you consolidate schools, if you lay off, first younger people, or whatever the case may be, also to add on that dimension of how would this impact teacher diversity. So that's the main thing that I've been thinking about, is what happens when these budget cuts come. And the reason why I've been thinking about that is because, for example, in Michigan and in Flint and Detroit, when they closed a bunch of schools, Michigan over the past, I'd say like 15 years, has actually seen great declines in its number of Black teachers. Because if your strategy of reform is to close, schools in Detroit and Flint, that's many of your Black teachers. And there's no place for them to go. And so that's the thing I would be most concerned about, notwithstanding, the widening of achievement gaps at the student level. At the teacher level, I'm just really concerned that many Black teachers will be laid off disproportionately.
Ms. McCrimmon, let me ask you, what have you seen COVID-19 impact educators of color? And then almost as a follow-up to Professor Lindsay's response, how do schools in general intend to address the budget cuts as it relates to our teachers of color?
I have to say right now, I haven't seen a great impact in particular in this particular district. I think they've done a very good job of trying to solidify employment of their teachers, and not just the teachers, but of all their employees here in the district. So fortunately for us, we've been able to offset any kind of layoff right now. But down the road, of course, I'm not privy to that information, and I'm not sure about that. I will say that a lot of the African-American teachers that I'm friends with, colleagues with, have had conversations with, they're definitely concerned about COVID-19 and the potential to come back into the school building and teach. I know a lot of them have underlying health conditions that are of concern. And so some are retiring early because of the fear of that. Others are wondering, especially if they're a single parent, if I have to go back into the school and teach, how does that impact my family and my children at home? And so they're having to consider other lines of work, or consider, can they continue to teach virtually and that kind of thing, and how it's going to impact them financially. So even though we haven't dealt with budget cuts here per se, the financial impact is still real for those African American teachers that I've talked to. And what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
Well, no, I think you answered it. Just what have you seen the financial impact, and how did you feel the schools would address them? And I think you answered that.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Mack, Ms. McCrimmon was talking about virtual learning, and you've got a fourth grader that's in the virtual academy right now. What has been your child's experience going back from March of last year to where we're currently at with online/virtual learning? What's your child's experience been like, and what concerns do you have for her and the rest of the students in our community in light of the ongoing COVID-19 concerns?
Thank you, Mr. Silver. That's a good question. Her experience has been one of success during the virtual academy. In fact, great success for her. I'm excited. She's a fourth grader. The difference with the virtual academy, in my opinion, is she did okay initially doing the non-synchronous or asynchronous experience that she had from March. She did okay initially. And then I would say okay being she was achieving as normal within the first month of March and April. But from what I understood from talking to her directly and her teacher is that many of the kids dropped off in the asynchronous experience before the end of the summer, where a lot of them felt like they were used. And in the asynchronous experience, there was no formal schedule where the kids were day in, day out making contact and seeing the other kids as regularly. So that was a deck at her age group level, not talk to other parents. So in answering to the virtual academy, Principal Scales and the Assistant Principal Hill and the group, I've been very excited and pleased. We just surpassed the first period of progress reporting, and everything was outstanding for my child. And from what I'm understanding from talking to her teacher, things continue to be going well for some other kids as well. I will say, I happen to spend a lot of time talking with a variety of parents and kids in the community, and it's not the same for everybody. I feel my child, Mr. Silva, is having success because she has a parent like myself coaching her, and I'm able to make sure that she's on task. I find that kids that do not have someone around, such as a coach, I would say, whether it's a guardian, a parent, or someone in your environment, they're struggling. I've even found with my child at times, a biggest challenge has been reminding her to listen to the teacher suggesting when to come back to class, when to get back on from a break. So I like knowing that as a coach, if I'm there, I can say, hey, I think they're back on now. So to answer your question in full, the virtual academy for me as a parent is providing mental health security. For my child, is providing mental and emotional health security. She's very nervous about COVID. She wears her mask all the time, sometimes even inside the house. So in saying that, for her, it's going great. I'm glad that Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools saw fit within our state and the governor's office to allow us the opportunity to go virtual. And I'm glad that in the synchronous situation where everything is, she signs on at the same time every day, she ends at the same time every day, it's more like a typical school environment. She's doing tremendous. I feel like if you don't have it in a synchronous manner, absolutely, like for many of us as adults, it could be a challenge because the discipline required would be a lot for more kids to take on than I think administrators and teachers have the resources, no matter how much they do, to assist with.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mack. And question for Ms. McCrimmon. Have you seen COVID-19 heighten disparities in education?
Most definitely. Our students of color, whether they're African American or Latino, the lack of resources at their disposal is definitely disparaging across this particular district. Now, I will say the district did a very good job of affording our students an opportunity to get hotspots and to get technology in order to be able to do their work. There are learning centers throughout the city where they can go and set up and have a structured environment to do their asynchronous as well as their synchronous instruction. But the issue is a lot of students don't have transportation to go to those learning centers. Not all of them are within walking distance of their homes. And even with the hotspots and the technology, you still have them in environments that are not conducive for learning. We have a lot of students who are their caretakers for their siblings. So if they are taking care of siblings, they don't have time to log in and deal with their own academics. A lot of our students, especially at the high school level, they are breadwinners for their home. Some of their parents are on disability, or some of their parents have underlying health conditions that are preventing them from going to work. And so now our high schoolers are picking up the torch and going out working 40 hours a week, some of them or more, in some cases to try to put food on the table. So it's definitely a lot of inequity going on as far as how COVID-19 has impacted our students.
For Professor Lindsay, thinking about the issues of inequity, what keeps you up at night when it comes to thinking about these inequities and how our educational system and how they impact our students?
Yeah, so to follow on to the COVID-19 thing, I think the thing I'm most concerned about is I think early data sort of shows that many of the students were just lost. They sort of went missing in the spring, and then they're not enrolled in the fall. And so I would be really concerned about where are they, who's serving them, and not just from an achievement standpoint, also from things like, are they getting their meals? So really, in addition to just widening achievement gaps and learning loss, also just now we have kids who are missing, and then my sense would be that those kids would be disproportionately Black and brown. So that's something I've been thinking about. There are districts, and I don't know if I have the data in North Carolina. That's something I could look up. But there are districts where, maybe they had, I was picking up like 20,000 kids enrolled last year, and then at the start of this year there are 15,000. And so I would just really want to know what happened to those other 5,000. Now, some of those kids maybe went to private schools, or they opted out, or whatever the case may be. But for the students whose families don't have resources, I would be very concerned as to what they're even doing and what that means once, eventually, hopefully, when school opens back up. How behind will they be? How will we remediate some of this stuff? And how will we get them back on track? So that's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately.
And Mr. Mack, I pose the same question to you. What concerns do you have as it relates now and in the future towards your child's education, as it relates to COVID and just broader concepts of inequity within our school systems?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks for the opportunity to respond. My concern is making sure that if the children have to go back to school physically all the time with COVID, whether it's 2020, 2021, et cetera, I want to make sure that the schools have every opportunity, the administration down, with the resources to practice safe and health behaviors. The schools cannot by themselves be expected to know and do everything. We already know, all of us together on this call, and everyone else knows, it's a national and international issue that has a variety of variables that affect positive outcomes. That being said, I support offering the kids and parents in the different guardian situations equal opportunity to learning, whether it be virtually and or physical in the classroom, because none of us want to see administrators or teachers or kids or parents or any other participants in the schools having health issues or even dying due to COVID if they didn't have to. And I think going on to the second part of the question with respect to the disproportionate representation, I am concerned about the numbers. I talked to other colleagues like you, Mr. Silver, like you, Professor Lindsay, like you, Ms. McCrimmon, and the attendance numbers are staggering to me. What I'm hearing is not necessarily a surprise, but I must say, when I talk to individuals that say they have 60 kids or signed up to be in school, and they only have in the classroom attendance on record of 17 or 20 on a daily basis. And I know the school administrators are doing all they can with the phone calls and reaching out. And in essence, kids or families are MIA, is missing in action. That's a concern. Now, we have that concern throughout the year in normal situations as well. What I'm finding just in conversations with professionals or peers in education is those kids and families that normally do well are trending to doing well like they normally do. Those kids, and we know who we're talking about typically, that struggle with resources and doing well in the physical classroom are also having that many more struggles outside the classroom. So in saying that, I think for all of us as potential existing and prior educators is to try to figure out what we can do within the community with leadership and the parents and guardian situations, as well as with education collaboratively to help appease and fill some of these gaps. Because I don't think it's because of lack of effort from guardians and parents and kids. I do know that if it's been a challenge for me at times, and I'm aware with technology, it has to be a challenge for kids and parents and households where no one is savvy enough to help with how to even log on consistently. So I'm excited in closing that we have a virtual opportunity. I think the situation of COVID gives us all an opportunity to be social agents for positive change, to be creative. However, I'm very aware, as each one of you represented here, is that it's a significant new challenge, but I'm excited about the opportunities it presents to us, Mr. Silver, with respect to us having the desire to see others learn, Ms. McCrimmon, and you, Professor Lindsay.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mack. And I want to turn to Mr. McCrimmon for a question. And it really goes off of what Mr. Mack was talking about. There's so many pressing issues, whether it be attendance, technology, health, funding, and just so many other things. How do we hold ourselves accountable to continue to work to achieve equity in education, specifically during a crisis like COVID?
I think from an administrative standpoint, we have to, like Mr. Mack said, be creative. We have to think outside the box. We have to do things that we normally wouldn't think to have to do. I know with our district, we have what we call a CARES team where, and I can only speak for what happens here at Parkland. So I know every Friday, our teachers have a group, we call it the Success Academy. And they have a group of students that they check in with every Friday. How was your week? Did you have any problems logging on? Is there anything going on that we need to be aware of? And we make notes of those things and we send it out to individuals on our CARES team to do a follow-up. If it's a technology issue or if it's a resource issue, we give that at the district level to our social workers and to other district level CARES team to kind of help facilitate some of that. So, I mean, we're doing everything that we possibly can within this district to make sure that our kids have what they need. But this is by no means easy. It's very draining. It's draining on our teachers, it's draining on our students, and it's draining on administrators and people at central office. I mean, I can't tell you the number of nights I've really worried about what this pandemic is doing to our educational system. Kind of to piggyback off of something Mr. Mack said earlier, you know, if you're thinking about achievement gaps were bad before, imagine what they're going to look like now, because a lot of the kids that need help, our EC population, our EL population, ESL population, those kids already have difficulties and challenges from March, being at home, not in a structured environment, not with a teacher that can give them that one-on-one help. And just imagine from March to now, or even if we have to go remotely longer, the impact of all of that non-instruction, non-structure environment, what that's going to have on them long term. A lot of times we want to think about the right here, the right now, but I'm thinking long term, how is this going to impact our students, not just academically, but social and emotionally? A lot of our kids don't do well being at home. School is a safe haven for them. It's a safe place for them to kind of escape the things that the world throws at them. So we as administrators and as people in this district that are working, we're trying to combat all of that. And honestly, sometimes it's kind of like a hamster on a wheel. You're just going, and you don't know where the end is going to be. So we're doing everything that we can. We wish we had more national resources. We wish we had more local resources, state level resources to do all the things that we need to do to combat this COVID, but you can only work with what you have. And so for me, being in that confined space is very hard, because there's so much more we could do if only we had the resources to do it.
And Professor Lindsay, I want to follow up with the same question with you, but specifically with your research, and you have such quantitative data about the inequities in the schools. How do we use your data and the research of others and your colleagues to hold ourselves accountable to work to try to achieve equity in education?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the biggest thing is just making sure that policymakers, stakeholders, use the information we have, right? So we have these studies that are pretty well known nationally, but they use North Carolina data, right? So it's not like where educators in Florida saying, oh, look at that very interesting study that happened in North Carolina. Like, this is North Carolina data. It's relatively recent. It's the reason why DPI makes this data available to researchers. So we have an evidence base. The other piece too I'll add is a lot of these things should come with our regular accountability reporting. So the way that we have report cards for schools, something on the school report card should tell us about the diversity of the teacher workforce in the school as compared to the students. That's an easy metric that we could add. And then once you add it as a metric, it's something people will care about. We do report cards for teacher prep. Just put how many students of color, how many candidates of color did you put out there? Did you train? And once it is a public metric, people will respond to that. Now, they might not respond in the ways we want them to, but so the data is there. One of the things that's interesting is many times I present this work to Black educators and they're like, well, yeah, I already sort of know, but there are people who do find it surprising. And so I think, yeah, just drawing on the evidence that's already there. And then two, using these data, which are available in public accountability systems. If this is something that we say that's important, so the governor did sign his task force, his executive order on diversifying the teacher workforce in December. So then it should be a part of regular reporting, regular accountability. In addition to gaps or however else you want to think about it, we also need to think about this diversity piece. And even with that, the diversity piece doesn't mean that it doesn't necessarily translate into teachers who are more equity focused, but it gives us a better chance. So those are the areas I would focus on. I mean, I think there's lots of energy around this, both sort of nationally, but definitely at the state level. So I think just holding people accountable to actually do what they say they're going to do. And I think a great way to do that is through the use of these data. So these are all data I got from the NC Department of Public Instruction. So they have it. They can produce some of this stuff on their own if they chose to, if we held them accountable. So that's where I would spend some of my energy, is really, make it a metric, make it something that we report on, make there be penalties if you don't do what you say you're going to do.
Mr. Mack, I want to ask you, and as a follow-up to what Ms. McCrimmon was talking about, when she was talking about the CARES team and the amount of effort that they're putting in, the social workers at the district level, and just really the strain on the administrators and the teachers in trying to make sure that our students are following on and that they're doing the work and that they have the support they need, and really just the amount of effort and stress that is placed upon them. What role can the community at large play in supporting our educators and students of color?
Thank you. That's a good question. All the questions have been great. Um, I feel like the community always has to recognize that the school, if you will, is a liaison tool to their children's learning. And to me, communities need to always recognize at the local and national and state levels the impact they have when they work together, when they have moments like this to talk, moments to learn from one another, moments to look at individually what's happening in an individual setting in their locale where their child's attend. Find out, reach out as a community with your local leadership, with your local schools, your children's schools, your neighborhood schools. Find out from the superintendent's office where the needs are. Talk to your board members and find out where the gaps are. I feel like the community must take part more aggressively during COVID and not be absent, but rather be very present in letting school administrators like Ms. Crimmin know that, hey, we're here. If there's anything we can do with providing resources, communication, mentorship, et cetera. I think now is time more than ever for the community, just as we're trying to help in health, we're trying to help in so many other areas. We cannot leave the schooling situation to be up totally to administrators, state officials, even board of school board members and elected officials to come up with every single solution. We have enough talent in the Winston-Salem community. There's enough talent in the local and state community and national community and resources where individuals like ourselves, like you all are doing with your board and others, can simply come together and reach out and say, what can we do to help? I do think it's good in closing that community reach out to the local schools to find out what their needs are, rather than making an assumption that we know what their needs are and we miss the target. I do think it's important, as you see some of our churches locally doing and some of the other big organizations doing, reach out to a school of choice or participating schools and find out what their individual needs are, because that's different per school, per grade level, and per situation. So don't take necessarily a blanket approach and decide that, well, every school needs this when every school may not need that. In fact, find out specifically from the leaders like a Ms. McCrimmon or others, what's going on at your school and how can we help at your school when you are accomplishing the task during this COVID experience so that we can have positive, creative outcomes.
Thank you. Ms. Lindsay, the same question. What role do you think the community at large can play in supporting our educators and students of color?
Yes, that's a great question. So I think, so some of the things I already talked about with holding leaders accountable, particularly on this diversity piece. I think also, so we're not going to have the diverse workforce that we want tomorrow, but we do have folks in the community who could serve as role models and helpers and, play other positive roles in children's lives in the short term that might sort of help bridge that gap if we don't have the educators that we need. It's not a perfect solution, but it's something that community members could do. I think also, so I think, keeping your ear on the ground in terms of what's really needed locally. There's so many elements of our education systems that are just highly localized and highly contextualized. And so it's really going to take community members to work on some of those gaps. But the biggest thing I would say is just holding people accountable for what they say they're going to do, and being a source of support for educators and administrators. And, you're also holding them accountable to also really being a true source of support to help them get done the things they need to get done.
And Ms. McCrimmon, I'll end with you and going off of what Professor Lindsay said and Mr. Mack said, which is reaching out to our educators and asking them what they need as an assistant principal and an administrator in our school system. What role would you like to see the community play in helping our schools, our teachers, and our students of color?
Oh, definitely. I agree with Mr. Mack in that we would love for our community partners to reach out to schools to kind of figure out how they can be a resource. Like he said, each school needs to do a needs assessment to figure out how the community can come in and make the most impact. Unfortunately, with COVID, we can't have the volunteers come in, but schools definitely need financial resources. They definitely need supplies for classrooms, teachers, definitely that mentorship when they are able to come back into the building, tutoring, reading buddies. I mean, the list can go on and on. And we welcome any community that wants to come in and spend time in our school and to actually impact our students in a positive way. But again, I would, like Mr. Mack said, I would tell community, reach out to the school of your choice. There's plenty of schools and neighborhoods. Churches don't feel like there's a separation of church and state when it comes to supporting your school. Some of our best supports come from our local religious organizations and churches, so we welcome that. But again, just reach out to the school of your choice, talk with the teachers, talk with the administrators, figure out what that school's needs are, and then formulate a plan about how you can be a partner with that school.
Thank y'all very much. I think this was a really good dialogue. I know I took a lot away from it, and I hope those that are watching did as well. On behalf of Black Philanthropy Initiative, I want to thank our panelists, Constance Lindsay, Lashonda McCrimmon, and Christopher Mack. Also want to thank Andrea Hooligan, Shamika Stark, and all the advisory board members of Black Philanthropy Initiative for their hard work in creating the forum and having this dialogue. Up next, we will hear from Scott Weirman, who will share some words on behalf of the Winston-Salem Foundation. Thank you all.
Thank you to our panelists for providing such thoughtful and engaging conversation around the issues impacting our students and educators of color. On behalf of the Winston-Salem Foundation, I would like to thank you for joining us virtually this year for BPI's annual fundraising event. My name is Scott Weirman, and I am the president of the Winston-Salem Foundation. This evening, we celebrate BPI for its commitment in undertaking important work related to equity and education, and to see firsthand how the investment of time, talent, and treasure can positively impact our community. The Winston-Salem Foundation highly values the work of BPI and sees it as a significant asset in our community. BPI is a 100% Black-led initiative making decisions on how grant-making dollars are used in our local Black community. We recognize there is a difference between doing things for others versus doing things with others, and it is not often in philanthropy we see decision-making power held solely by people of color for people of color. Over the past 3 years, the Foundation has been working to infuse a racial equity lens across all of our work. We have committed to centering the voices and lived experiences of people of color, recognizing that only by doing this can we improve outcomes for all. BPI has been an incredible example to us in this work, and while we are still relatively new in our racial equity journey, we are more committed than ever to the work and look forward to continuing mutual learning with BPI. Initiatives of the Winston-Salem Foundation, such as BPI, allow us to challenge and broaden the overarching cultural perception of what philanthropy is and what role we want to have in the process. Together, we have a great opportunity to honor and continue the long-standing tradition of giving in the Black community in order to create a more equitable and inclusive Forsyth County. Thank you for your time and support this evening. Now you will hear from a few members of BPI's advisory committee who will provide some special recognitions and speak to how you can become part of the collective giving power of BPI.
Thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Nicole Gentles.
And I'm Brittany Norton.
And together we serve on the BPI Advisory Committee. Due to the generous support of our corporate and foundation supporters, BPI has had a very successful year in carrying out its mission to impact change in the local Black community.
Grant-making support from Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust and the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation has allowed BPI to provide more grants this year than any other single year in its history.
We also thank Legacy Federal Credit Union, M&F Bank, and Wells Fargo for sponsoring our fundraising event, and M Creative for providing their marketing and design services to us for this event pro bono.
We'd also like to thank Quality Education Academy for being such a wonderful partner to us by offering their beautiful auditorium space for us to film various portions of this evening's fundraiser. All of our supporters have made it possible for us to come together tonight and to continue to make an impact in the Black community moving forward.
Yes, Brittany, we are truly grateful to our corporate and foundation supporters. Now, we would like to take time to give special recognition to members of our Marshall B. Bass Society. The Society is named in honor of the late Marshall B. Bass, the first chair of the BPI committee, a great philanthropist and community leader.
Mr. Bass passed away last year, and it means more to BPI than ever to continue what he started and to honor his legacy.
Members of the Bass Society make a gift of $1,000 or more to BPI in a calendar year. Thank you to the following members for their generous support between October 2nd, 2019 to September 24th, 2020. Mr. and Mrs. Bruce M. Babcock, Dudley and Julie Bell, Mr. and Mrs. John W. Burrs III, Mr. and Mrs. Richard N. Davis, Cynthia Emery, Mr. Jeremiah Irby, Mr. and Mrs. J. F. Goins III, Mrs. Elizabeth Medlin Hale.
Reverend and Mrs. Donald Jenkins, Dr. Michael Mitchell, Mr. Chris Paul, Mrs. Wynn Tanner and Judge Michael L. Robinson, Dr. May L. Rodney, Dr. and Mrs. Eric J. Sadler, Mr. and Mrs. Melvin Scales, Ms. Corliss Sellers, and Claire and Randall S. Tuttle. Gifts to BPI help us continue to reach our mission as well as grow our endowment, and we are so grateful to our Bass Society members and all of our supporters. We could not do our work without you.
And now you will hear from our fellow BPI committee member, Dr. May Rodney, with closing remarks.
I am May Lipscomb Rodney, a second-term BPI board member, Resource Development Chair, and a Bass Society member. Welcome to the house that Marshall Bass began. He and other Winston-Salem Foundation leaders outlined the mission for the Black Philanthropy Initiative 20 years ago. Real-time construction projects require contractors, subcontractors, and reliable helpers to finish a bill of any size, on time, and within the budget. The principal contractor describes and promises a beautiful design and prompt completion date. But if reliable and qualified subcontractors are not scheduled in the right sequence, the building will be delayed. A quality product is unlikely to be the outcome. The right timing, all hands, and talents are necessary to reach the promised deadline and desired results. Now is the right time for BPI to grow into a viable local philanthropic voice. There is much work to be done in the community. Big and small contributions from contractors, subcontractors, and all helping hands are needed. In spring 2020, the organization made a major shift in funding priorities, choosing to respond to pressing needs. Grants were awarded to public and charter schools during early days of online learning to make technology accessible to our children who needed hardware and internet access. This summer, another round of grants were awarded with the goal to address significant needs within the Brown and Black community. The initiative can become even more proactive through large, medium, and small contributions from our residents. We are keeping our eyes on our environment and will make future decisions based on these new findings. Know that anytime you give to BPI, your contribution is being leveraged with other dollars to make a larger impact. That is the power of collective giving. As a Bass Society member since 2015, I invite you to join me in becoming an annual contributor to the Black Philanthropy Initiative. This year, more Bass Society contributions were received, and those funds will be used wisely to further our local impact. We thank those contributors for believing in BPI's mission and efforts. If you are not ready to make an annual commitment, please make your best contribution this year and proudly watch BPI become a stronger presence. Thank you for your contributions and, just as important, your goodwill. And we do thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you again for your support.